I don't know about you, but the news cycle since the inauguration has me f***ed up, y'all. Everything feels incredibly overwhelming and also very bad. It is nearly impossible to know where to look, what warrants energy and attention and what doesn't, and how to react to any of it. And that's precisely the point. It even has a name, flooding the zone, apparently coined by Steve Bannon in 2018. It's simply where Trump does so much in such quick succession that Democrats and the rest of us don't have time to catch our breath between each new order to actually do anything about any of it. And it appears to be working on all of us. And despite the fact that I am also reeling from the news cycle of the past 10 days, I do consider it my job to parse through it all and connect the dots and draw the big picture so that we don't miss the forest for the trees. I'm still unsure how to exactly do all of that because it's hard to know how bad some of this will be until it plays out in the courts, something that I will also continue to keep tabs on. But there is one area where his actions are having extreme, immediate negative impacts that the courts are not really stepping in to stop, and that's immigration. Anti-immigrant sentiment is older than America and has intensified in recent years both here and abroad, likely a result of increased globalization and concentration of wealth, so it feels like we're all fighting over scraps down here, and anyone who comes for our scraps is a threat. And the billionaires taking all our wealth are like, yeah, it's the Mexicans for sure. And it is purity of the race and fear of outsiders that have led to the greatest atrocities in past fascist regimes. So it feels important to keep an eye fixed on that arena now more than ever. Today, we're going to talk about what Trump has done on immigration, how it's playing out in the streets, and what your rights and the rights of your immigrant neighbors are if ICE shows up at your workplace or your school or your church. Let's get into it. Thank you to my partner on today's video, Lumen. I know firsthand how incredibly frustrating it can be to be trying to do all the right things for your body and to still feel exhausted all the time. After the stress of the pandemic and a stint working an incredibly demanding job as a corporate lawyer, my body was messed up, to say the least. I gained 40 pounds, lost my period, I was constantly tired all the time. Something was wrong. And this experience sent me down a rabbit hole of learning everything I could about health, wellness, hormones, metabolism, and it turns out it's all connected. And it's not as simple as calories in versus calories out and eat more vegetables and protein for more energy. And once you start down that rabbit hole, you'll find a million purported experts online giving you advice that's iffy at best. And it's overwhelming and impossible to know what's actually right for your body. That's where Lumen comes in. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. In less than 30 seconds, first thing in the morning, Lumen lets me know whether I'm burning carbs or fat for fuel. And this is really important because when we can easily shift from burning carbs and fats in our body, depending on our energy needs, it's a sign of metabolic flexibility. Lumen then gives you recommendations to improve your metabolic health based on the context of your breath measurement. Lumen helps me focus on balance, not perfection, and educates me about my own body. Having that personalized insight into how your body is functioning is so key to learning how to make your body feel the best that it can feel. So if you want to stay on track with your health, go to lumen.me/Leeja to get 20% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/Leeja for 20% off, or just click the link below. Thank you to Lumen for sponsoring this episode. If you want a comprehensive history of immigration laws in the US, you know I got you. I already made an episode about that. You can watch that after this, because today we're literally just talking about the past 10 days. It hasn't even been 2 weeks. I've culled this information from a number of experienced immigration attorneys and organizations. Link to all my sources is in the description. First, there's the order titled Protecting the United States from Foreign Terrorists and Other National Security and Public Safety Threats. This is directed at the Department of Homeland Security and Department of State, telling them to implement enhanced vetting for both visa applicants and those already in the country. Then there's the order protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship. This one rewrites the Constitution to limit birthright citizenship to only people who have a parent with a green card or a U.S. citizen. This would apply to children born on or after February 19th, 2025, though a restraining order was issued blocking this one from going into effect for now, with arguments expected to be heard on February 6th. The executive order declaring a national emergency at the southern border of the United States does just that, and goes hand in hand with his other order called Securing Our Borders, which directs the use of the military to secure the border, build physical barriers, use drones and other strategies to block unauthorized entry at the border with Mexico. It gives Pete, unqualified drunk, allegedly Hegseth, full authority to send whatever numbers of military personnel he sees fit to the border. It ends CPB-1, which was an app that asylum seekers could use to pre-schedule appointments and meetings, and it ends the parole program called Processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. This is also called humanitarian parole and allowed people from those 4 countries who have a sponsor in the U.S. and passed a background check to come to the U.S. legally for 2 years to live and work. That's gone, including for the literal hundreds of thousands of people here legally under that program who now have their legal status revoked or in limbo. The order also told Homeland Security to reinstate Trump's Remain in Mexico program that he started under his first administration. It sends migrants seeking asylum to Mexico to await their court proceedings instead of waiting in the U.S., as is typical. Then there's the executive order protecting the American people against invasion, which allows for the expansion of expedited removal, something the DHS has already implemented through a new rule. Now, anyone anywhere in the U.S. who can't prove they're here legally or that they've been here more than 2 years to the whim of whatever ICE officer approaches them can be detained and deported without notice or a hearing before a judge or the presence of a lawyer without due process. And it empowers state and local law enforcement to investigate and detain immigrants as well. It also orders that sanctuary jurisdictions that interfere with immigration enforcement will have their access to federal funds revoked. In addition, it requires all non-citizens to register and present their fingerprints to the U.S. government, and those who fail to do so will be subjected to criminal penalties. And it calls for audits and freezing of all funding for NGOs engaged both directly and indirectly in assisting undocumented immigrants in any way. The executive order guaranteeing the state's protections against invasion declares an invasion at the southern border and gives DHS and the Secretary of State the right to prohibit entry of any person, including asylum seekers, at the southern border as they see fit. The order realigning the United States Refugee Admissions Program ends the program effective January 27th until DHS gives an order resuming it. So any refugee applications will be suspended until further notice. In fact, the State Department sent a memo to all resettlement agencies early on January 21st, ordering them to cancel travel for incoming refugees. So that program effectively ended on that day. And then Trump also rescinded a list of 78 presidential actions from the Biden era. Of those, at least 5 were immigration related. Those were called 1. Revision of civil immigration enforcement policies and priorities. 2. Creating a comprehensive regional framework to address the causes of migration, to manage migration throughout North and Central America, and to provide safe and orderly processing of asylum seekers at the United States border. 3. Establishment of interagency task force on the reunification of families. 4. Restoring faith in our legal immigration system and strengthening integration and inclusion efforts for new Americans. And 5. Rebuilding and enhancing programs to resettle refugees and planning for the impact of climate change on migration. Those are all gone. And these executive orders and presidential actions have a larger impact because they then empower DHS, the Secretary of State, the Army, Border Patrol, ICE, to then create regulations to carry out those orders. The expansion of expedited removal is a directive from the DHS. The DHS has also issued a new policy revoking protected status of sensitive locations like churches, schools, and healthcare facilities. So immigration authorities can now conduct raids and arrest people where they live, work, worship, attend school, and seek medical care. And I've pointed this out in past episodes, but it bears repeating. There is a pattern here with how immigration and immigrants are being talked about, both on the campaign trail and now officially in these orders. They are called enemies from within and an invasion at the border. According to my brain and this show in the past, as well as now legal experts who are talking to mainstream media, this language is very deliberate because when the president can say something is in the name of protecting national security, that gives him a lot of leeway to do heinous shit. Japanese internment camps, national security. And these national security measures take on new meaning and become even greater when the nation is at war. His intention to declare war on illegal immigrants is also clear by his frequent references to the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which expands presidential authority and has most recently been used during World War II. In another of his executive actions, he officially dubbed drug cartels as terrorist organizations, further lending fodder to the idea that there is an invasion of enemies, now terrorists, at the border. Elizabeth 𝗦𝗦𝗣𝗢𝗏 of the Brennan Center for Justice told NPR it's been widely understood that the president has inherent constitutional authority to repel sudden attacks or invasions. So these are terms that summon essentially war powers. On the Alien Enemies Act, she says, it's quite clear that the framers understood the term to deal with armed attacks by foreign powers. We're talking about acts of war. We're not talking about unlawful immigration. But by dubbing cartels and everyone who supports them terrorists, numerous immigrants could be swept swept into the terrorist camp, including those who have family or geographic ties to cartels, as many people who live in cartel-heavy areas often get swept up in cartel activity whether or not they consent to it. According to NPR, the state of Texas tried to make a similar argument about invasion at the border last year and lost that battle in court, before a judge appointed by Ronald Reagan, no less. So it's unclear how many of these new policies will actually hold up in court. However, I do want to point out that a couple NPR articles I cite to by Joel Rose, including one called "Trump's Immigration Orders Are a Blueprint for Sweeping Policy Changes," are a great example of the subtle way right-wing extremists have infiltrated mainstream media. The article refers to the Brennan Center for Justice as a left-leaning nonprofit and the Center for Immigration Studies as a think tank that favors lower levels of immigration. The Brennan Center is associated with NYU, one of the top law schools in the country. The Center for Immigration Studies was literally co-founded by a eugenics-obsessed white nationalist ophthalmologist and has been designated a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Why are we quoting experts from both places with equal weight and authority, NPR? Okay, so that's what Trump and his administration have done just in the last 10 days relating to immigration. Here are the immediate and potential impacts of those actions. Visa processes will be even more backlogged than they already were, with more processing and requests for additional documentation, and people from high-risk countries will encounter heightened scrutiny. According to the BBC, there are an estimated 3.6 million cases pending before U.S. immigration courts. Immigrants already have to wait years, usually, for a hearing. With these new measures, many are left unsure whether their case will ever advance at all. This goes for people fleeing persecution, but also people seeking visas for work and education. Also, border chaos. These actions are leading to more militarization at the border and longer wait times because of heightened scrutiny. As of right now, according to NPR and the BBC, about 1,500 active duty troops have been deployed at the border, though their official role is limited to building the wall and operating flights that are deporting around 5,000 immigrants per month. And that is an increase from the 2,500 active duty troops in the area already, a 60% total increase. And that chaos is especially acute for refugees and asylum seekers. And yes, there is a difference between the two. The Immigration and Nationality Act guarantees access to asylum for those fleeing persecution. So there will likely be lawsuits following from Trump's actions barring asylum seekers because it goes against congressional intent and beyond his authority. You apply for asylum once you get inside the U.S., typically. However, Trump's Remain in Mexico policy turns that on its head, forcing people back into Mexico into often dangerous situations to await asylum appointments that will now likely never come. However, that program requires Mexico's consent, and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said Mexico has not agreed to accept U.S. asylum seekers. But because she's not a hateful fucking ghoul like Trump, she did say that the Mexican government would provide humanitarian assistance to migrants on the Mexico side of the border. Relatedly, this past weekend, the Colombian government refused to allow 2 military planes that were carrying deported immigrants to land, with Colombia's president calling on the U.S. to treat Colombian immigrants with dignity. Trump, for his part, it turns out, does not know how to spell Colombia, but he did threaten Colombia with tariffs, and shortly after, Colombia agreed to accept the flights. CBP One, the app that allowed asylum seekers to make appointments, was immediately shut down, stranding about 30,000 people on the Mexico side of the border whose scheduled appointments were canceled, though upwards of 270,000 people are reportedly on the Mexico side of the border waiting to get appointments through that app alone. Mexico has begun constructing giant tent shelters along the border to temporarily house migrants, along with fleets of buses to help them return to their hometowns, the same towns they were attempting to flee. Refugees, as opposed to asylum seekers, are often temporarily living in some third country, applying for entry to the U.S., and must undergo background checks and an interview before setting foot in the U.S. The program for processing those applications has also been suspended, so all refugee and asylum seeker movement will be paused and in limbo until further notice. According to the American Immigration Council, the overlapping nature of the existing restrictions and the new barriers added by Trump's executive orders mean that it will take some time to untangle their impact. In practice, overlapping restrictions often mean that border agents are given arbitrary and unaccountable power to determine what happens to a given asylum seeker. They may prove impossible to fully unravel or undo, even if the political climate were to grow more favorable to humanitarian immigration. For sanctuary cities, Trump has threatened that federal funds will be revoked to cities that do not comply with ICE raids and other federal immigration actions. According to the Washington Post, a spectrum of practices can be interpreted as sanctuary policies, but most jurisdictions with the label generally do not allow local jails to hold immigrants accused of committing crimes beyond their allotted time or hand them over to ICE custody. Other communities bar local police from inquiring about immigration status during arrests. interests. They're often Democrat-led state, county, and city governments. Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, told CNN that migrants without criminal records could also be swept up by ICE, especially those living in sanctuary cities, though he didn't provide specific information, instead blaming the sanctuary cities for not allowing law enforcement to assist federal immigration officials. According to the American Immigration Council, the funding threats and threats of criminal prosecution to sanctuary jurisdictions may successfully intimidate localities who would otherwise seek to avoid entangling their local law enforcement with Trump's mass deportation campaign. Targeting of sanctuary cities has already begun, with the House Oversight Committee launching an investigation into Boston, Chicago, New York, and Denver. Their mayors all received letters from Rep. James Comer on Monday requesting information and their testimony before Congress. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson has affirmed his determination to keep Chicago a welcoming city, though ICE conducted sweeps in Chicago over the weekend. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has gleefully confirmed that the NYPD will be coordinating with immigration authorities willingly. The mayors are still reviewing the letters and making determinations as to how much they have to legally comply. And as to immigrants everywhere, with the expanding power of ICE and increased raids, anyone who's an immigrant, whether or not they're here legally, and anyone who's a U.S. citizen but looks brown, is up for grabs. Native Americans have even been caught up in ICE raids and are now subject somehow to the 14th Amendment birthright citizenship debate, which we won't even get into. In fact, Trump has even floated the idea of deporting U.S. citizens with extensive criminal records to be held in foreign jails for cheap. And you know he means black people with that one. Deportation is the answer to illegal immigrants, criminals, and anyone he disagrees with, including the bishop who asked him to show mercy to the less fortunate. On January 26th alone, ICE and other agencies arrested 956 people. That being said, I do want to add a bit of context because it's easy to feel like anti-immigrant policies have been ramped up from zero in the last 10 days under Trump. That is not the case. For example, Biden issued an executive order this past June barring the right to seek asylum for anyone who didn't arrive through an official port of entry. Biden also deployed active duty military to the border. In his 4 years as president, Biden carried out 1.5 million deportations, about the same number as Trump carried out in his first term. In 2024 alone, ICE agents arrested nearly 150,000 people, or around 400 per day on average. And Obama deported 2.9 million people in his first term alone. Yes, Trump is ramping up anti-immigrant policies and doing away with polite-sounding rhetoric, and he's promising to increase deportations even more in the coming months. But this is largely a continuation and exacerbation of existing anti-immigrant policies, not the complete fabrication of new ones. What he's really doing is simply getting rid of the few protections left to provide immigrants with any shred of dignity or legal protections on their path to entry and citizenship. And the chaos is meant to overwhelm, confuse, and consume us, and back up his xenophobic anti-immigrant rhetoric and campaign promises to keep his base happy. But that doesn't mean that there aren't new and increased risks for immigrants, their families, their children, and anyone who looks kind of brown under these new and more draconian policies. For example, requiring all non-citizens to register and present their fingerprints to the U.S. government not only creates a handy list for immigration officials, it also means that people here illegally, who likely would not comply for fear of deportation, could more easily be deemed criminal for their non-compliance, placing even more of a target on their back and providing further justification for inhumane treatment, since Trump and his supporters do not care about the human rights of people they've deemed to be criminals. According to the American Immigration Council, the Trump administration is threatening to turn all immigrants into criminals by setting them up for the crime of failing to register. And freezing funding for any NGO that assists undocumented immigrants will ensure further human rights abuses go unchecked. Indeed, according to the American Immigration Council, the fundamental promise of asylum, that someone fleeing danger can present themselves to U.S. officials to seek safety, remained intact in one form or another prior to Trump. With these executive actions, asylum in that form is dead. Because of these increased risks, immigrants and anyone who looks like an immigrant will need to have documentation on them at all times, proving the legality of their presence here. And while it's not unreasonable to carry your driver's license or other ID on you at all times just in case, the requirement takes on a whole new insidious meaning when it's a requirement because immigration officials, the military, and local law enforcement in some areas can stop anyone at any time and force them to prove their legal status. This is the same tactic used across the country, especially in the South, to control and intimidate free Black Americans prior to, during, and long after the Civil War. It is the same tactic used across Europe to control and intimidate Jews and other undesirables before and during World War II. It is very dangerous to tie whether or not someone has documentation on them at any given moment to their rights to freedom of movement and of life and liberty. And it is being used as a proxy to target people based on the color of their skin, period. It will lead to widespread racial profiling. U.S. citizens have already been caught up in drive-in raids and other immigration enforcement actions just since Trump took office last week, and that will continue to happen. And that uncertainty alone puts a huge strain on immigrants and their communities. According to the American Immigration Council, the extent of the chaos will be determined by implementation, but evidence from the first term of the Trump administration shows that the uncertainty itself produces strain on immigrants and their families, especially children, that will have long-term consequences for their futures and the future of the country that is currently declaring them unwelcome. Chaos is the point. Transparency is not. While chaos has already started at the border and in cities across the country, it will take months to iron out what a lot of these orders even mean. So while I hope this episode is a helpful overview of what's going on, and I think keeping an eye on the big picture is important, this is another one of those situations where avoiding overwhelm and focusing on local issues is paramount. And there are so many dire issues coming up, from immigration to LGBTQ issues and so much more, that it's hard to focus on just one. I will attempt to provide regular big picture bird's eye views of a number of issues as they develop, but I wanted to start with immigration because xenophobia and ethnic cleansing are often central tenets of fascist regimes. And so while so many people's rights are on the line, immigrants are the ones facing very immediate threats and who are some of the most vulnerable people that the Trump administration knows it can take advantage of. So what does that mean for you? Two things: mutual aid and knowing your rights. Tap into immigrant mutual aid networks if you are able to give your time or your money to help families seeking assistance. Legal aid organizations also often provide legal assistance to immigrants and are at risk of losing their federal funding. Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, recently bemoaned Know Your Rights efforts, saying they're really about knowing how to escape arrest, which, yeah, precisely. Having rights means you can't just be arrested. Pesky little things, these civil rights. And knowing your rights clearly annoys Tom Homan, so that's enough reason for me. Knowing your rights, whether you're an immigrant or not, is important for your own safety and for your ability to assist your neighbors, friends, family, coworkers, people at your church, people at your school, and more. America is, after all, the land of immigrants. Most of us are descendants of them at some point. There are tons of Know Your Rights resources out there. Typically, they're divided depending on the situation, so I'll do that here. Side note, this is not legal advice in any way. This is for educational purposes only. I'm not your lawyer. First, what to do when stopped or questioned by law enforcement or ICE. Stay calm. Don't resist. Keep your hands visible at all times. Memorize important phone numbers for your family or lawyer, or keep them on you at all times. Do not lie about your status. Carry your immigration papers or ID with you at all times. Many states require that you give your name to law enforcement if they ask for it. Do not lie. If you're asked to show your immigration papers, you must show them if you have them on you. Do not say anything to ICE or the cops. Do not sign anything. Do not make any decisions without a lawyer. If you do not have your papers on you, do not speak to the officer. Tell the officer you want to remain silent and you want to talk to a lawyer. You have the right to remain silent and to talk to a lawyer before answering any questions, but you must vocalize that right. You must say, I would like to remain silent until I speak to a lawyer. If you're arrested by police, you have the right to a free government-appointed attorney. If you are arrested by ICE, you have the right to an attorney, but not a free government one, so you should ask for a list of free or low-cost alternatives. If an officer or ICE asks to search you, you have the right to say no. They cannot search you without probable cause. The only exception to this is that they may pat down your clothing if they think you have a weapon. If you believe your rights were violated, write down and date everything you remember as soon as you can, including badge numbers, patrol car numbers, agencies that they're from, any other details, contact info from witnesses, and file a complaint with the officer's agency. What to do when the police or ICE comes to your home. Keep the door closed. It is much safer to speak to them through the door. Teach your children to not open the door. Ask them, are they immigration agents? What are they there for? Ask to see their badge through the window or peephole. Ask them if they have a warrant, and if they do, have them slide it under the door or show you through a window. Do not open that door unless ICE or the police shows you a search or arrest warrant signed by a judge specifically naming someone in your residence or the specific areas to be searched at that specific address. A police arrest warrant allows them to enter the home if they believe the person is inside, but a warrant for deportation does not allow officers to enter the home without consent. If they do not produce a warrant, or the warrant they have is just for deportation, say, I do not consent to your entry. If they force their way in anyway, do not resist. Say, I do not consent to your entry or to your search of these premises. I am exercising my right to remain silent. I wish to speak with a lawyer as soon as possible. Do not lie. Do not produce false documents, and do not talk to them or sign anything. until you get a lawyer. And what to do if ICE raids your work, church, school, or hospital. If you're a US citizen and feel safe doing so, record the activity with your phone or immediately write down information about what you witnessed, but do not interfere or obstruct the operation. If you are a US citizen, ICE does not have the right to detain, arrest, or question you. If they do, tell them you are a US citizen, ask for their name and badge number, and then say you wish to remain silent and speak to a lawyer. Then talk to that lawyer about filing a lawsuit for fines and monetary damages. Do not run. Do not carry false documents. Say you wish to remain silent and speak to a lawyer. Do not speak to them or sign anything until you talk to a lawyer. In all scenarios, especially for non-English speakers, it's a good idea to carry a Know Your Rights card. The Immigrant Legal Resource Center has red cards with basic guidance, and you can physically hand the card to an ICE or police officer, and on the back, in English, it invokes your right to silence and to an attorney. This can be presented to cops or ICE whether they come to your door or stop you somewhere else. Printable versions of these cards in numerous languages are available on the Immigrant Legal Resource Center's website, linked in the sources below. Keep your paperwork and printable copies of these cards on you, your family, and your children at all times. For immigrants and their families, the name of the game is to be prepared. For US citizens and those unlikely to be targeted by ICE, it's to provide aid in the form of time, money, and recording injustice. That being said, it is paramount that you do not misreport what is happening. Reports of ICE sightings are spreading like wildfire, oftentimes leading to false reports that are then amplified over social media. This sows chaos and panic and can even hurt immigrant businesses that are often located in hubs where rumors of ICE spottings are localized. Local immigrant resource organizations are actively creating and managing hotlines and other means by which the public can report ICE sightings and raids. For example, the Resurrection Project Immigrant Justice has a hotline for ICE spottings in Illinois, especially in Chicago, where there's been a lot of activity. Follow those organizations' social media for more accurate, up-to-date accounts of ICE spottings. Do not share unverified reports. Keep going to immigrant businesses. Stay calm, but do not ignore the injustices as they are happening. Do not physically interfere when you see ICE, but do actively speak out against their presence to your community and your elected officials, and provide aid where you can. Focusing on your community and immediate surroundings will work against the chaos Trump is trying to sow. Don't let it overwhelm you. And you can join me over on my Patreon community, where I just launched the Why America Co-Learning Lab, a learning community having discussions and making connections, along with a monthly syllabus curated by me. All year, we'll be covering topics under the umbrella theme of Eat the Rich, building solidarity in the new Gilded Age. This month's topic has been all about learning from history to fight for the future. We're looking at and discussing past movements to see where we can learn from history, because it does have a tendency to repeat itself. This is all hosted over on Patreon, patreon.com/LeejaMiller, linked down below. If you're interested, please join us. Thank you to my multi-platinum patrons, Sarah, Shelby, Art, David, RH, Latranger Lucas, Joshua Cole, Thomas Johnson, and Tay. Your generosity makes this channel what it is, so thank you. And if you like this episode, you'll like the one from Monday, where I read the entire US Constitution out loud since the White House decided to take it off their website. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.